How do FBI profilers know what a killer is thinking before they're even caught? It almost sounds like something out of a movie, right? But it's actually rooted in a very systematic, very real analysis of human behavior.
Really the central question that drives the entire field. Because for a profiler in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, a crime scene isn't just a jumble of fibers and fingerprints. To them, it's a psychological portrait, a direct window into the mind of the person who did this. So, how do they actually start to read that portrait?
Well, it all begins with one core principle. Our behavior reflects our personality. And think about it, especially under the intense pressure of committing a violent crime, a person's actions are a raw expression of their deepest psychological makeup. The crime scene is basically where that personality is put on full display. FBI profiling is built on this really logical framework. The first assumption is that an offender's behavior isn't just random, it's a direct reflection of who they are. That means the crime scene itself becomes this landscape of behavioral clues. And when these behaviors start to repeat across different crimes, they form a pattern that points right to the offender's personality type. So let's start our investigation right where the profilers do. We're going to deconstruct the most critical piece of this whole puzzle, the crime scene itself.
Profilers are looking for very specific things. They ask questions like, was the scene neat and planned out, or was it just a total chaotic mess? That one detail alone can tell you so much about the offender's state of mind. How was the victim controlled? Was it with physical restraints, or was it through verbal manipulation? Each choice tells a different story. And did they try to clean up or hide evidence? That points to someone who is much more calculating. Every single detail is a piece of the psychological puzzle.
And all of these observations lead to the first major fork in the road. You have the organized offender, who shows control and planning. The crime is a deliberate act. And then you have the disorganized offender. This person is impulsive, driven by chaos and raw emotion. This distinction is fundamental. It's the first real insight into an offender's capabilities and their psychological stability. But the analysis doesn't just stop at the physical location. The choice of victim, well, that's just as revealing. So beyond the scene itself, what can the victim tell us about the person who attacked them? This is where victimology comes in. Profilers ask these really critical questions. Was the victim just a random person, a target of opportunity, or were they specifically chosen? Do all the victims share something in common, like their age or their lifestyle? That could be a window right into the offender's private fantasy. Even looking at the amount of risk they took to get to the victim, that speaks volumes about their confidence and their motivation. Okay, now we're going to go a layer deeper. We need to distinguish between what an offender has to do to commit the crime versus what they need to do to satisfy some deep psychological urge. First up is the modus operandi, or the MO. The easiest way to think about this is as the offender's how-to guide. It's the method they use, the weapons, the steps they take. But here's the key. The MO is a learned behavior. That means it can change. It can evolve as the offender gets more experienced or maybe tries to outsmart the police. Now, contrast that with the signature behavior. This has nothing to do with actually completing the crime. This is all about fulfilling a deep-seated psychological need. These are ritualistic things, like posing a victim in a certain way, that aren't necessary at all. This is the offender's psychological calling card. And unlike the MO, this stays stable because it reflects the core reason why they do what they do. And this really shows you the difference. Plain and simple. The MO is what they do. It's practical, it's learned, and it evolves. The signature is who they are. It's psychological, compulsive, and it pretty much stays the same. Being able to separate these two is absolutely fundamental to understanding the person behind the act. So how does this all come together? Well, by combining the analysis of the crime scene, the victim, the MO, and the signature, profilers can finally start to build a coherent psychological portrait of the person they're looking for. A lot of the time, this process starts by going back to that organized versus disorganized idea. All the evidence from the scene starts to point toward one of these profiles. An organized offender, for instance, is likely to be intelligent, socially competent, they plan their crime down to the details and leave a controlled scene. A disorganized offender, though, they often act spontaneously, they're probably more socially unstable, and they leave a chaotic scene that's really a reflection of their own inner chaos. From that starting point, profilers can begin to infer specific psychological traits. The evidence might suggest psychopathy, a total lack of empathy, or maybe a need for control or to taunt the police.
That could point to narcissism. Now, these aren't clinical diagnoses. They are analytical deductions based entirely on the offender's behavior.
Profilers also look for patterns over time, because serial offenders rarely stay the same. They often escalate. They might commit crimes more frequently, start taking bigger risks, or become more violent. This pattern of behavioral escalation is a crucial tool profilers use to try and predict what an offender might do next.
So we have the theory, which is fascinating. But how does this actually work in the real world, and what are its limits? It's really important to get this. The purpose of a profile is not to magically point to one single person. It's a strategic tool for the investigation. It helps law enforcement narrow down a huge pool of suspects, it gives them focus and direction, and it can even help them figure out the best way to interrogate a suspect by suggesting what might motivate that type of person.
You know, what's really interesting is how the FBI itself used this practice. This quote just captures it perfectly. A profile is a form of intelligence that supports an investigation. It is never, ever, a substitute for hard, definitive evidence.
And we have to be honest about the scientific limitations here. Human beings are complex, right? Not every offender is going to fit neatly into an organized or disorganized box. The way someone interprets behavior can be subjective, and the accuracy can really vary from case to case. And above all, it always works with forensic science. It never, ever replaces it.
When you boil it all down, criminal profiling is a process of translation. It takes the chaotic language of a crime scene and translates it into a psychological blueprint. No, it doesn't solve the crime on its own, but it provides a map that can guide investigators through all the evidence toward the person responsible.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If a violent crime scene can be such a clear window into a person's mind, what other, more common human behaviors might be leaving their own hidden psychological traces if only we knew how to look? Comment your thoughts on this video. Also, subscribe to us to see more videos like this in the future. See you in the next video.